And here we are. Good afternoon. All right, let's see what we got. Let's hit Facebook. So we'll wait for a few people to join us, and then we'll get started. Hey, guys. Good to see you again. We will get started in a few minutes so that we can give everybody a chance to get in the room and get seated, or in the various rooms and get seated. And a dog, good to see you. Always a pleasure. Let me see. Oh, yeah. And then Michael Hall was on just a few minutes ago. I think he had been camping out. It reminds me when I see these, occasionally I'll see the comments in the chat window before the live streams go live. And it reminds me somewhat of, and I'm getting a little bit too, I might be giving up. Well, heck, we're all about the same age. It reminds me of, the time spent standing in line, sometimes for hours in front of an Apple store to get a phone or whatever device happened to come out that particular time. Michael Hodges just checked in. Hey, Michael, the introduction of the Romulans. Looking forward to watching it for the first time in several years. I feel the same way about it. There's an interesting, is it live or is it Memorex moment for me at the end of this episode. And those of you who've listened to, my ranting and raving sometimes about TV, I love Star Trek. But I also, one of the things that I love about drama in general, while I could probably never actually sit and actually watch a Greek tragedy, I love the concept that's behind them. And so in my mind, and I might even have it wrong, but in my mind, when I think of something like that, I think of, when you're done with the story and a whole bunch of things happened, but you still walked away from a story realizing that someone had just paid a horrible toll. And this, growing up in the 70s, like many of us did, when I first saw Balance of Terror and subsequent airings after that, was in syndication, which means you had no control over when it was going to show up and when you're going to see it. However, I must have read the James Blish novelizations 100 times, maybe more. And I know that he would work from earlier scripts than would actually be used in many cases. And in some cases, there were some serious differences. Of course, the City on the Edge of Forever script would be different than he used. But I remember that James Blish really, really drove home at the end of this episode the fact that the two that were getting married at the beginning of the episode, that she had lost him. He was dead at the end of the episode. And I think the actual verbiage of the last paragraph was something along the lines of, maybe not quite fade to black, but it's like, that the sound that you heard in the absence of all other sound was the sound of her crying over the loss of her fiance. I think that's from the Blish book. I don't know if it actually if this episode ends that same way or not. It's been so long since I've seen it. And as you get older, sometimes reinforced memories from different sources of the same event can cause the Mandela effect. Okay. For those of you who do not know what the Mandela effect is, I'll give you just a Star Trek example in a nutshell. All right. About a year or so ago, I did a video on the PSA that was aired during Star Trek the Animated Series. It was part of the Keep America Beautiful program. I think I had it up there, and I'll probably be putting it up again in where I talk more about the PSAs in general and the Mandela effect. The public service announcements in the 1970s were managed and released through maybe federal, I don't know, but it was released through a national organization. And they have a website and they have records. And you can go online and you can look at every PSA that was ever allowed to air on TV as a PSA, as a public service announcement. Keeps all of them. There are people who swear on a stack of Bibles that they saw a different PSA than Keep America Beautiful in Star Trek the Animated Series. But there's no record of another PSA ever been done. And that organization that did them says, only one for Star Trek, and that was it. But we remember it. There are those of us out there that remember it, and you can tell us all we want that didn't happen. We have a firm memory. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the Mandela effect. For you non-Star Trek fans out there, and if you are actually watching this, then I hope you become a Star Trek fan as a result of watching the fun that we're about to have. But for the non-Star Trek fans out there, the most common occurrence of the Mandela effect in the general population, which is a little bit weird, it occurs, I guess, this would have to be 40-somethings and above, is the memory of having seen the comedian from the 1990s by the name of Sinbad in a comedy movie. swearing a stack of Bibles. We saw him. I remember that movie. I can't remember the name of it for life of me, but I've seen it. He never made a comedy movie. But ironically, if you look up Mandela Effect on the internet, you'll find out that's the most common story that is often repeated by John Q. Public, when they discover that, hey, no, you have a memory of something that didn't happen. Anyhow, I'm going to jump back. We're going to get ready to start this in a moment here. I'm going to get caught up on the comments that we had just before we go in. Underdog reminds us that the bird of prey under the Romulan ship always impressed the heck out of me. I thought that was absolutely amazing with the way that was done. Interestingly enough, they never really did that on any other ship in any other race that I can think of in the remainder of Star Trek. I don't ever remember seeing any images beyond, the little triangle-shaped things the Klingons would use and everything. So I thought that was pretty interesting. What we got. And then Michael brings up, I met a couple at Ticonderoga who had gotten married in the Star Trek set tour using the ceremony from this episode. I don't think that was a good sign to start the marriage. Mike, I absolutely. Okay, I think, yeah, the cynic in me probably goes, you guys might want to rethink that. But at the end of the day, the beginning of that ceremony was actually pretty darn good. And I have to go back and look. I want to say maybe that Picard did one too later on. I don't know. It's been a while. But yeah, I can see why they chose it. But yeah, the true Star Trek fans cringe and say, you know what, if you're going to do that, you might want to take time off immediately after the wedding, leave your job, whatever, go away, come back later. All right. So I'm going to go ahead. So for those of you out there, we are going to get our video from Pluto TV. If you do not have Pluto TV, you do not need to register for Pluto TV to be able to watch this. You can go ahead and watch it just like normal. It will have advertisements as we go through it. In the event that you have your own source for Balance of Terror, whether it be your own personal media server, like me, or whether it is another service like CBS or something that will allow you to watch it without commercials, you are more than welcome to do so. Just be aware that you might get slightly out of sync with the rest of us. And with that being said, just to go ahead and start the clock, I'm going to go ahead and start this thing on my side. It is probably going to make noise. If it does, I'm going to mute mine a little bit. I had turned it down because I don't want feedback coming through. For those of you who are following along Pluto TV with me, it just started off, and it is one of the remastered versions. And we are, in fact, beginning, like we were saying, we're beginning with the marriage ceremony. I am turning it up a little bit, but I also have my captions on because, like I said, my important thing here is to make sure that I can see what you guys are doing. Okay. The movie was Shazam. Actually, wasn't that Shaq? Conference room scene is excellent. Great scripting and cinematography to go with the acting. Yes. The couple at Ticonderoga said if they got divorced, they wanted Denny Crane to handle it. I assume they told that to Bill while they were there. That is absolutely brilliant. You just gotta love Star Trek fans. Michael, thank you for pointing out that I did put it in the video description. I can never quite trust myself, Since the first days of... All shipmasters have had one happy privilege, the uniting of two people in the bonds of matrimony. It is really interesting because even though it would take us until we get to Star Trek The Next Generation to see families, this was actually the first indication in the original series that even though they were both active duty, that yes, there were family arrangements on board starships, that if you had a spouse, that's Miles, by the way. A bunch of you probably are familiar with some of the names of my animals. I have two dachshunds that show up on the live streams on Friday night, sometimes by the name of Dax and Esri. And then Miles, of course, is named after Miles O'Brien. I try to name most of our animals after Star Trek characters. I might turn mine down a little bit. If the sound on my TV, on my Apple TV, becomes audible in the background for this, let me know and I'll turn it down more. I think it clears out some of the low-end noise filters, so you may not be actually getting it, but hey, just want to be certain. Yeah, interesting. I met Mark Leonard at a small public appearance only once. We'd seen him in other conventions as the years would go on, but around 1981, 1982, he came to Dover, Delaware, and he appeared at a little private college that was out on State Street, I think it was called. And he was there for a speaking engagement. I mean, we went into this little, the little auditorium, because it was a small private college, and he talked. And it was very interesting, because I imagine that what I encountered then was very different from what you would encounter from him in later years. Because remember that at the time that this had occurred in 1982, relatively, he had appeared obviously in Balance of Terror, and he'd come back as Sarek, Spock's father. And of course, he had done the turn as the Klingon in the motion picture, but not everybody knew that. Remember, this was before 79 to 82. This was before the internet. So, the average fan may not have recognized or ever knew that that was Mark Lenard underneath the Klingon makeup until much later, or if they had been reading Star Logs or something like that. So when he got to talk for like an hour, there wasn't a whole lot of Star Trek to talk about. So the majority of his conversation to us was really about his acting experiences. And as a result of that, he had two other properties that he belonged to that had been, obviously he loved Star Trek because, Star Trek people loved him, but it wasn't what you call steady work. He was involved in the TV cast for Seven Brides and Seven Brothers, and he might have actually been involved in one of the Broadway versions, I'm not sure. But he talked about Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. And then in particular, he talked about playing, and I think it was General Ursus. I think Urko was in the movies, and Ursus was in the TV show. But hey, I was, 8 at the time? I'm not sure. But in the Planet of the Apes television series. So he talked quite a bit about working under those prosthetics and learning the psychological, physiological responses necessary to bring to life a character under something like that. And if there's anything that I can show people, and maybe one day I'd like to do it, but it's not a Star Trek thing, but I'd love to do a little video of it, because if you really want to watch the evolution of a character or of an actor in a specific kind of character, there is no better example in the world than Roddy McDowall in the Planet of the Apes movies. If you watch him as Cornelius in the original movie with Cornelius and Dr. Zero, you'll see some of the things he tried to do as chimp-like accents. He was quite fond of pushing his lips together to make that bulge so that a little pop-out thing happened between them. But he continued to play a character in every one of them, finalizing, I believe, with Conquest for the Planet of the Apes or Battle for the Planet of the Apes. Conquest, maybe. But anyhow, the second to last one was when he played Caesar for the first time. And so that movie had Ricardo Montalban in it. It was really, really well done. Ricardo Montalban was a zookeeper that had him. But when you watch Roddy play Caesar, the way he holds himself, the way he would sway from side to side, had a slightly hunched over demeanor on screen. Tremendous example of promoting emotion and performance through prosthetics. The only other person in my life that I've looked at do the same thing is Doug Jones, who plays, of course, Saru, but you might know him from, the original Hocus Pocus, Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water. He's almost a freak of nature. Unlike Lurch, Ted Cassidy, he's not just big, but he really is good at emoting emotion and character through any layer of makeup prosthetics. What he was able to do with Saru just blew me away, because if you go and you look at Saru's facial appliance compared to so many others, whether we had whether we had Odo in Deep Space Nine, or obviously the Klingons, there was a lot more freedom of expression in those because they were much more humanoid type to us. Whereas Doug Jones as Saru has a tendency to look almost like those visible skeleton things where you can see the musculature under the skin of a human being and you see all the muscle groups and stuff. So that is interesting. So we're back with the husband and wife team, or the engaged team. They're not actually married yet. So he just points out he's still her superior officer. It's interesting. I don't know whether or not that would be if Roddenberry had to reimagine that, and we don't know what would have happened post-marriage about them working together in the weapons room. And I might just be reading things into things that don't need to be read into. It's just that after the events of the Sullivan boys during World War II, and realizing, when a whole family can get wiped out because they were stationed on the same ship, and then the armed forces say, we can't allow that, we got to spread out. So maybe after they actually had been married, Kirk and company, or her commanding officer, would have reassigned them to two different departments. But I don't know. They're weapons specialists. That's their weapons specialty. So maybe they would have still continued to serve in the same department. I don't know. That with over 880 some hours, probably we are well over 1,000 hours now, but with that many hours of programming, maybe you guys can chime in and let me know. I don't know if we've ever seen an example of a couple working together in the same department area in any of the Star Trek series that follow this. All right. We're now seeing the results of the attack on the outpost. I talk about this all the time, and you guys too as well, but I still can't overemphasize this enough. The cinematography and the lighting of this series. The keystone lighting that we're seeing right now, where Spock's face is fully illuminated, but Kirk's face is somewhat in shadow with highlights around the eyes to draw our attention to his eyes as supposedly a method of emoting emotion. You don't see that very often, even at Desilu. I mean, go take a look at any of the episodes of Mission Impossible that were made around this time. Now we've got Kirk and Spock both somewhat in shadow. So yeah, Jerry Finnerman was an amazing person. I think so much of the way we feel about Star Trek wouldn't be the way that we do without him. It's amazing how many individual people had to come together to give us this product, because they left their fingerprints on everything. Whether it was Finnerman's use of using, gels over lights that he would bounce off walls to give a room a soft glow, or the lights that he would use, the key lights that would be cast on specific actors. And then there are composition things that when I was younger, I never would have noticed. And now that I'm older, I wish I'd actually knew enough about these things to ask, but I'm staring. We just saw a shot of Kirk on the bridge looking at us, and immediately to his right is the gentleman that's sitting in the helmsman or the navigator spot. And it's interesting because Kirk's face is highlighted from the left side with light, soft light, and the gentleman at the con is highlighted from the right side, which makes sense because they obviously have the lights in different places in the bridge. They couldn't, otherwise it would have oversaturated something. And if you want to see an example of what I'm talking about, go and watch any of the last, say, 10 episodes, maybe a little more, but go into the third season and look at an episode from the end of the third season, because Finnerman had left the show that year. I don't remember off the top of my head how many episodes he made. And when he left the show, his use of lighting and its visual design, it's the design language, I guess, of the lighting is gone. And as a result of that, they feel differently. We always pick on Spock's brain, and maybe it is a good episode to pick on. Maybe I'll pick on it for the rest of my life. But if you think back to Spock's brain, because we all laugh about it so much, there were no real shadows in play here. It was all brightly lit for the most part. The next time I remember shadows coming into play importantly was Robert Wise in Star Trek The Motion Picture. He very, very much wanted the bridge to appear like a bridge would appear on a submarine or on a naval vessel, and that was that you would keep the glare to a minimum, unlike JJ, who loved just throwing off lens flares in every direction. So I think the use of key lights and darkness is an emotionally powerful tool to use in a show like this. All right, let's go pick up some of the things you guys have said while I've been running my mouth. He also did the TV show. Yes, he did. I think you're talking about our buddy. He played, Roddy McDowall played Galen, I think, in the TV series for the Planet of the Apes. It speaks volume to Kirk's compassion and understanding how close Lieutenant Styles in this episode comes outright subordination with one of his outbursts to senior officers. Yes. And this is actually, there's Mark Leonard. And now everybody looks at Spock. There you go, Lieutenant Styles. Get a close up. Nimoy's eyebrow just went up. Now, the crazy part is, and again, this is year one of a television series that has just created itself. We have 50, 60 years of fandom behind us now to give us all the information we needed to know. But it is crazy that, even Spock appears to be illuminated and caught off guard by the Romulan captain's Vulcan appearance. When we find out later that the whole idea behind the split that happened in his people during the Surik movement, that those folks left and later became Romulus, that period of their history was obviously pretty well known. The fact that those people evolved into Romulans without someone like Spock knowing it, and remember, Spock's father is an ambassador, is a little bit of a stretch. So I thought that was a little bit on the convenient side. Star Trek episodes, the scripts and the stories are always amazing. The stories are incredible. But they do, in my opinion, which is just my opinion, which means it's worth about as much as this water, they do, in my opinion, sometimes get lazy and take the easy way out of a scene via their writing. Do we know if the view screen frame in blue is actually a neon tube? This is one of those cases, Underdog, where I really wish that because I'm watching it on Pluto, I'm watching the CGI version. So since I'm watching the remastered version and I see that like neon blue that you're talking about, I don't honestly know if the neon was added as part of the CGI process or whether they kept it after they cleaned it up and just simply matted in the digital image around it. I don't honestly know. If any of you out there are watching this with us tonight that is actually watching it on the original effects version, it'd be interesting if you chime in and let me know whether you thought that they were there as well. I doubt that it's lit, and the only reason I'm saying that is I seem to remember tons of production photographs over the years, even the Clapper slides, that don't seem to really have anything other than like maybe a small matte frame around it. Didn't look like anything that would light up. But I could be wrong. Would not be the first time. It kind of bothered me that earlier shows had cloaking devices, while here it is treated as something unheard of. The cloaking device, it's so funny, Michael. We think sometimes so much alike. Because earlier this afternoon, as I'm thinking over my memories of this episode, because I haven't seen it in decades probably, but as I'm thinking over my memories of this episode, I remember thinking that the cloaking device as we see it here is a game changer between the Federation and the Romulans. This is just absolutely, positively, oh my God, what in the world is this? And again, I think it's because it's the first year of a brand new show that had not established a canon history yet. Because one thing we should know by now is that in the Star Trek universe, even in canon, cloaking devices were known by this point. So yeah, they become a lot less important. And I wrote off the fact that they're not all that much more important. And even I was thinking about that aspect this afternoon when I was pondering this question as a result of the Enterprise incident where, Kirk and they actually steal one off a Klingon battlecruiser. And therefore, at that point, apparently now end up with the technology that they can at least reverse engineer. So I pretty much always viewed that as being, okay, that one particular scene in that episode is why cloaking devices are not considered showstoppers in the future. Although I will point out that the Federation's agreement, I believe at the Khitomer Accords, was that they would not use cloaked ships. Some of you out there might be able to remind me if I'm misremembering the Khitomer Accords. But of course, that was the result of the Defiant in Deep Space Nine being the first Federation ship with a cloaking device that was approved and sanctioned under the treaty. The Outpost Protective Shield, hardest substance known to science, turned into brittle. It changes its molecular structure. One of my favorite scenes is when Kirk puts Styles in place after his comment about Spock. Yep. Might be Mandela, but I remember the neon blue on the original episodes. It may be there. It may. I have the original episodes unmodified. I actually have them in a digital format, so I'll just probably grab one later after this episode. But take a look at it, keeping in mind that at that time when they actually made these, it is conceivably possible that it does have like the neon blue strip around it that was actually that it could actually be part of the optical mat that they used to place over the film negative. So it might still be that even though the photographs I've seen seem to show that there's no lighting fixture that appears to be visible, it still could have shown up as a result of the matting process. Hey, Matt, I have to admit that when I first saw the episode, I wasn't as enthralled with it as I became in later years. It's really Run Silent, Run Deep, I think was the name of the movie. I'm not sure. It's really nothing more than, a World War II sub-destroyer cat chase movie or episode. I guess that as you get older and you get further and further along from childhood, the weight of things that happen takes on a greater importance and shifts perhaps the way that you feel about this episode. Obviously, our entire structure understands completely the emotions involved in, your children type of thing. Never liked, no. I don't want to say your children type of thing. The older we get, the more the nuances make sense to me. The loss at the end of the bigotry from the navigator. All these are things that as a younger child, I might not have really recognized as being so emotionally important as they would become later in life. Almost looks like Halley's Comet a little bit there, but I imagine that's probably done deliberately. This is the helmets, for those of you who may or may not be aware, the Romulan Centurions were wearing helmets. The helmets were actually also created by Hua Chang. Not all Romulans wear them, obviously. It seems to be limited predominantly to the Centurions, which would make sense, very much like the Roman armies. One of the other things that always impressed me about Captain Kirk was his swagger when he's walking down corridors. Classic Captain Kirk. Absolutely. Bill Shatner exuded confidence and command as Captain Kirk. A very, very much different and very apparent difference in the portrayal of Christopher Pike by Jeffrey Hunter and Bill as Captain Kirk. Jeffrey Hunter's Captain Pike was more along the line of the seasoned veteran who may be getting tired of his role. So he's not going to be doing anything really, really dramatic. Whereas Jim Kirk's whole approach to that kind of stuff was far more action-oriented. Mr. Chang's, yes, his imprint in Star Trek history is all over this. Very good, Michael. Absolutely right. I was actually first alluded to that by Tallboy. He did an excellent job on, I think it's TrekPlace.com, of identifying all the different shots that were used in the original series unmastered. Where are the 30-foot and 11-foot models? And what were the various differences in phaser delivery types? And he mentions the proximity lasers, and they only happened one time. They would sometimes create different phasers and stuff like that, or proximity phasers, without really having a need to do it. It is a shame that Hua Chang never got to live long enough to actually see his contributions in Star Trek being widespread in their acceptance. Absolutely agree, Michael. It's one of those things that's controlled by budget. Nice effect, though. But for every person that you could actually have put on one of those How about that was one person you didn't need pointed ears on? What else we got? Yes. Yeah, the photon torpedoes definitely were used as the upgrade for phasers. Wonderful idea. Little did we know that the concept, would later on go into quantum torpedoes and stuff like that. The red handrails. I was actually thinking about a variation of that this morning, too. There's a line in Strange New Worlds, I think, where someone goes through the bridge of the Enterprise, and I think it's Giorgio, and makes a comment along the lines of, oh, well, orange is now the new color of the bridge. Star Trek was originally fond in the original series, the color orange. I'm sure you're aware of it. There's this one orange fabric that shows up just about everywhere. It showed up in fedoras. It has showed up on walls of rooms. And, of course, it has actually shown up in bedding as well. It was this orange fabric that was used quite heavily that looked somewhat futuristic. Dave Blass pointed out to me that the red handrails were a trip hazard. They were too low for the outer rim of the bridge. It's like the buckles, the biosensor buckles used in Star Trek the Motion Picture as well. This episode actually deliberately moving at a very, very slow pace. It's not an accident. It's a calculation on behalf of whoever the director was. And it's a direct throwback, I honestly believe, to the submarine movies that were made about World War II. Because nothing ever happens in movies or in real life that happens fast. It's a very slow, inexorable progress to a completion. You can see they are still working out terminology. Command base, not star base. Yep. Some of you may have actually caught, too, and I'm sure we'll be watching this at one point in the near future, that the remastered version of Menagerie, the shuttlecraft is from Starbase 1, I think it is. But if you look at the non-remastered version, there's no markings on the Galileo shuttle at all other than the numbers 174. Obviously, they were put there by Dayton for some reason, but I don't think anybody ever actually found out what it was they were there for. Why did he feel it important to jot those numbers down? Maybe we are no longer living in the Prime universe. Tying into the whole idea about cloaking and stuff like that, it is crazy because we have stealth technology now all the way back into our own current time. From what I gather, the strike that we did a week or two ago against some spots in Syria and stuff like that, they used the B-1 stealth bombers. Those babies took off from the United States and flew halfway across the world undetected, or at least performing exactly the way we were hoping they would. You must be there somewhere. In another world, I would have called you friend. I'm turning it up just a tiny bit more on my side. I've been reading the screen caps, but it's hard sometimes to read the screen caps and focus on it. Can I get you something from the galley, sir? Way back before poor Grace Lee Whitney found out that she was no longer going to be strategically important in Star Trek. That's a story that sucks no matter how much you reread it. They threw her a bone in the movies when they brought her back, but still. Some of you, the regular channel viewers, keep an eye open for maybe tomorrow night at the latest. I have another video that will be breaking that I imagine several people are going to be talking about. I have news for you on the Tomy Enterprises. If you missed your chance to buy one of the Tomy Enterprises when they first were released, and you are not entirely happy about the concept of paying somewhere between $1,500 and $2,000 for one-off eBay, then you're definitely going to want to keep an eye open for this video. It's not going to be very long. It's come out. It's going to tell you about how there's a way for a period of time to pick up one of these for the original price from Tomy. So you definitely want to make sure you subscribe, turn on the notification bells, all that good stuff, and see what it is. I'm not going to go into much detail around with it here because obviously, one, I want to save it for the video, and two, it's not an infinite supply. So once the video starts making its rounds, it would be worth it to invest in the time to determine if you want to spend that $600 now sooner rather than later as far as speed is concerned. But watch for the video tomorrow. I like the alternate version of the episode Strange New Worlds. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I've had some weird thoughts on Strange New Worlds that I've thought about a little bit on doing the channel here, but I haven't made my mind up yet because there's so much else going on. But in reality, Strange New World and TOS are one and the same. Now, there's a timeline difference, obviously, because of the amount of time that's passed between the two of them. But for the most part, they're in the same in-universe game, for lack of a better word, the same in-universe environment. So theoretically, it could be interesting to do a small series of videos that looked at the times that Strange New Worlds attempted to tie to canon, Valhalla type of beliefs, but that it became very important to them that things have honor. And a dishonorable kill is not something that you would try to even feel good about if you are a true Klingon. So ironically, it's the same behavior that we're seeing in Mark Leonard's Centurion or his commander right now. You know, the CGI stuff, everybody picks on the CGI stuff is not bad when you consider that it was done back in like 2005. I mean, Lord, guys, that was 20 years ago. So the CGI work that we're doing now, like the work that I had Tobias Richter do for us when he generated the Enterprise Force last year, stands out head and shoulders above what we have today. But the reality of the situation is 20-some years ago, or in this case, 50, 60-some years ago, was the only technology they had to work with. It always makes me chuckle how the young upstart Romulan basically gets them all killed when he goads the commander into attacking again. Hello, Romulan bird of prey. I would love to see a 1/350 scale model kit of a Romulan warbird and a bird of prey. Same here, my friend. Same here. Good to talk to you again, Warren. It's been a while, I think. Spock saves the day again, time and again, both in TOS and Wrath of Khan. This is the scene that's been preying on my mind since my childhood. Let's see what happens. Bad guys, Dad. They say they'll support whatever decision you had to make. Thank you so much, Starfleet Command. We didn't even call it Starfleet Command. She called it Command Base. We talked about that. You guys mentioned the Starbase earlier. Is this Styles the same Captain Styles in Star Trek 3? Ooh, you raised a really good question. It could be. Because you can notice the little bit of pompousness and animosity that was displayed in Star Trek 3
never makes any sense.
Might actually be explained if this were the same character. Because he seemed to be exceptionally pleased with himself and that he was in a position where he could lecture to Kirk. You'll never sit in that seat again. In the Wrath of Khan, Spock is always subtly giving Kirk the answer, but there is the Mutara Nebula. This strategy shows two-dimensional thinking. Now, mind you, a 1/350 warboard would have a 5-foot wingspan, but a bird of prey would still not be out of the question. All right, so I guess that answered my own question there. The scene was written, the way I remembered the scene being written was, in fact, from the James Blish book. Same events, slightly different story to be told at the end. It was like a moment of silence, I think, at the ending of the novel. If you haven't read the James Blish books in a while, guys, go out and get them again. Dig them up, read them again. It's they're really, really neat for a variety of reasons, most of which being, of course, that they can actually show you alternatives and earlier versions of scripts. So I absolutely loved reading through them to look for things that are different than I expect them to be, simply because they were, written in that time frame. Remember, James Blish did not actually get an opportunity to see a single episode of Star Trek until 1969. He'd been living in England the whole time. He had to wait for the BBC to show it over there. So he never had the opportunity to get involved and watch Star Trek. He also was not overly fond. There is a video out there, and I am going to try to break it up into some smaller pieces for some of you guys, because it's about an hour long, and I realized that I might have gotten a little crazy maybe with the length. There's just so many interesting things about it that I liked. But he wasn't a huge Star Trek fan, and he hated the whole concept of writing novelizations for money, for novelizations of other people's property for money, because he thought it was just a cheap hack to do that. He would later on go on to say, though, cheap hack or not, he made more money from the licensing and from the payments off those books than he did of everything else in his career. But he had pretty much checked out of the books by Star Trek V. I think he was partially involved in Star Trek V. Star Trek VI was mainly his mother-in-law and his wife, J.A. Lawrence. So it's interesting. These were things, of course, I would not discover until many, many years later. I had always just assumed that James Blish had been a Star Trek fan that was active right up to the very end. Okay, let's see. We got one more thing. While we're on it, was Commander Hansen an ancestor of 7 of 9, Annika Hansen? Oh, my Lord. All right, I think, that's Kirk Swagger again. That's a, how do I call that? That is it's almost a genetic defect of Shatner's. He cannot resist. It's really, really, you see it in his real early work. You see it in Star Trek a lot. It was still there to a degree in T.J. Hooker. And it was very, very much so still visible when he did the made-for-TV movies and stuff in the 1970s. A Horror at 37,000 Feet. The Devil's Reign, which was theatrical release. There's a little bit of swagger in his character. He had a lot more of that in his personality. He mellowed out, I guess, as the years went on. It is a walk of confidence, I feel. Yeah, agreed, 100%. All right, guys, I think that's going to be it for today. I want to thank you for joining us. I'll put up the next one. We're going to be doing these every 2 weeks, I think. And if you haven't already caught on, I didn't make the decision until about a day or two ago, but I figured out what the heck. I'm probably not going to do the live streams on the same weekends that we do these, simply because it's just a lot of airtime for me to be on the air. So that's why we didn't do one last night. So we'll probably alternate them. We'll do one of these on a Saturday, like we've been doing. And then we can do the live streams, on the opposite weeks. And we might even talk to a group of people to find out if you want the live streams later, or do you want maybe. And I think that's about it. A reminder to the patrons on the channel, we have our Zoom conference call tomorrow. So please, I look forward to meeting all of you again. We can talk about all of the crazy things that have been happening in the world of Star Trek recently. One of the things I would have discussed in the live stream, I'm not going to get into it now because I haven't read a whole bunch on it, but I'm sure it's going to come up tomorrow. There has been an offer to buy Paramount by a very, very rich, like Elon Musk type personality. But the gentleman made a bid for BET. And he was turned down, so they weren't really interested or whatever. So he came back and said, fine, I'll just buy the whole company. So we'll see what has to come up of that. Anyhow, guys, I think I will talk to you later. I've had a great time, as always. The next episode, I'll try to make it a little bit more perky between the yawning and how it was a very slow, methodical episode. I loved it. I'm a Star Trek fan. I'll watch it 100 different times. But it definitely would invoke that, especially when I'm trying to talk quite often about a topic that has nothing to do with what I'm seeing on the screen, and then watch what's going on the screen. It definitely was invoking the tryptophan effect that you get from eating too much turkey at Thanksgiving. Anyhow, guys, thank you very much for your time. As usual, it's been wonderful. I look forward to talking to you all again and seeing you real soon. You will see the poll go up probably next day or so on the community about what we're going to watch next. Take care, guys, and I will see you next week.